Hi everyone, delighted to have Dr. Gemma Parry with me this morning. I've been really interested in Gemma's work over the last number of years actually around the developing child and the growth spurt. So I'm delighted that Gemma's joined us this morning for this Tuesday takeaway. Gemma, just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here. It's wonderful to speak with people who are equally as passionate about the things that I am passionate about. So I guess to introduce the work and the position that I come from, I'm not necessarily from education. I am a physio by background and I have nearly 20 years in professional sport. So I've worked through various Olympic and Paralympic programs. So I've supported athletes through the Rio Olympics, PyeongChang Olympics, Tokyo Olympics and into Paris. I've also spent a little bit of time in the education sector teaching and supporting physiotherapists in their development. And I have a really big body of research around understanding the growth spurt and how movement quality and competency changes. So that's kind of what's really driven me to get to the point here in developing a concept that I caught up with 2 years ago that's known as the developing child. So the whole purpose of that project was about working together with other disciplines away from physio, so working with my colleagues and practitioners in education, through healthcare and then sports environments to really look at how we are managing, developing and supporting our young people through a really pivotal time in their development, really.
And obviously, we know as directors of sport and sports teachers, there is a dropout, particularly in girls actually at this sort of age. So, what have you learned that you can share with us and as directors of sport so maybe they can enhance their programs with the knowledge around the developing child and the growth spurt?
Yeah. So I think if you look at the point where organisations and schools, they start to notice you get this cessation and dropout and disengagement, you start to see injury spikes, you see pressure from society on kind of performing. It's usually within that 18 to 24 months window around peak growth. And that's where most of your decisions can either protect and encourage young people to thrive, or that's when you really start to lose them entirely. So I think some of the key things about understanding this process is it's not just physical. So we
Yeah.
talk about this in multi-domains, and I think physical is the ones that we align with most because it's really easy to see when a child has had that big growth spurt. You can visually see it. There's those really big biological changes that occur. So this is like your hormonal changes and your sexual characteristic developments. For women, we see the arrival of your first period. We also have the psychological. I think a lot of people sometimes forget the brain is developing equally as
Mm.
quickly and disorderly as the physical growth that you often bear witness, I would imagine, in PE. And then we also have that psychosocial, that environmental change. So for children and young people, self-concept is reorganizing so quickly and just as much as the physical body is reorganizing as well. So one of the very key messages we have is being aware of those four domains. So just understanding what they are, how they might present and show up in your environment, and how you might be able to use them and work with them rather than against them.
So once you've looked for these, maybe you could tell us very, in a basic level, what should we be looking out for, and how could we maybe monitor it? And then once we know that, what would be our tactics, if you like, to make sure that we can keep as many children engaged as possible?
Yeah, so if I start with physical, because like I've already said, that's probably the easiest one to see. So quite frequently we see that in changes in skeletal growth. So those really big, sharp growth spurts. So children are growing 1, 2 inches. They come to school one height, they turn up the next day and look like another. This might also present in what we sort of see as adolescent awkwardness. So this is a term that we use that kind of describes like this clumsiness. So people talk to them about being like Bambi on ice, or they're very gangly and they just sort of don't know where their bodies are in space. So when you start seeing that, for some children, it also presents as a drop in skill. So it might be that they came in, they could catch a football, they could kick a ball, they could coordinate, they could move really well. And then that skill suddenly seems to literally disappear overnight. So sometimes we can interpret that as maybe a change in attitude or being lazy or not being as engaged as they once were. So actually, I think being aware and actually just pausing and stopping and going, oh, is what I'm seeing part of this physical change window? Or is this actually something that needs a bit more support because that child is psychologically
Yeah.
now not sure what's happening to them? So I think once you've been able to identify that, just talking to them about their own developmental journeys. So this is something that when I speak to teachers, some teachers maybe are aware of that journey, but don't necessarily know how to talk to children and young people around that. So just normalizing what is happening, that they could be part of a growth spurt, and just explaining about how that can impact their skills or what they're trying to deliver within PE, physical activity or sport. So normalization, reminding them that it's only temporary, and
Yeah.
reminding them that these changes are going to be coming
Yeah.
for this period of time, but it will all level out, is actually like just a really nice way of being to address that environment straight away.
So let's talk about, the skills and the psychosocial. You know, what skills, what gameplay, what psychological skills, if you like, could we or should we be encouraging children to do during this growth spurt?
So I think from a psychological perspective, you see those real big dips in confidence sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think, again, that links into the psychosocial aspects around the status and the hierarchy of where they sit.
Yeah.
There is a real concern for children. It's a silent barrier, which I'm sure most of you see in your practice all the time. It's that desire not to be seen to be failing.
Yeah.
So I think setting up for different opportunities for success. So again, when we see children in those big kind of growth spurts, children that grow early, so they're sometimes known as early developers, they're the ones that seem to naturally, the environment tends to suit them better.
Yeah.
So thinking about differentiation in how you provide lessons, so different types of equipment size, different spaces size, how you match and mix children, can also level out some of that playing field. So from a psychological perspective, children are then seeing themselves maybe be a bit more successful, they're seeing themselves achieve. Just really simple things as well, like if a child is on a hockey pitch and they're maybe taking a bit of a risky shot or they're doing something a bit different, praising them for trying, praising them for having a go, rather than, oh, you didn't get the goal or you weren't successful. And just little things like that, I think, can subtly change the environment and how they're seen amongst their peers, to give them some of that security and safety around how they're moving and working.
I'm smiling there because one of my favourite sayings, James Ingle, he's the director of sport at Royal Russell, he talks about catching people in. And I think exactly right. We often praise the outcome of a skill rather than, let's say, the risk in itself. And I also think, as you sort of alluded to there, it's important, isn't it, that we have a strategy for the early developers and the late developers, because I've seen it, early developers, we often think, oh, they're good at this, they're flying and whatever. But, in terms of upskilling them or giving them leadership skills or whatever, it is important, isn't it, to have strategies for the early and the late developers?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think what's really interesting is we tend to identify these children sort of between the ages of 11 to 13, because we're picking off that the physical aspect that we see. And by the time that levels out when they're 15, we've almost missed those selection windows and those selection opportunities. So I think other things that's really interesting for schools is looking at those moments in time. When are you shutting your selection windows and doors down? Are you just doing that at the ages of 11, 13 and 16? Or actually have you got opportunities throughout the school year and through within school years to sort of recheck your systems in terms of where you are and what you're hoping to be? Children really need to be viewed as this whole changing system rather than that fixed athlete. And if you can get into that mindset, you'll start to make really good developmentally appropriate decisions at those key times and those key windows.
And I think, let's face it, 11 and 13 are ages where pupils and students start school. So you could have been, really enjoy your sport, be thriving, flourishing when you're 10. You go through the growth spurt. And if you're making those selection decisions in year 7, it's almost like getting a group of kids and saying, you're selected, you're rejected. When, as you say, if you had that, a bit more patience. I wanted to sort of grow on that point that you said earlier about, designing the program for belonging and why that is important for children as well. Do you want to expand on that a little bit, Gemma?
Yeah, I think when we look at this, certainly through physical literacy lens, and I know most of your listeners and members will be very familiar with that, retention is social long before it's anything physical. And I think all any of us want for children is for them to come in and enjoy where they're at and have that opportunity to development for lifelong success. And I think it's really difficult when you're, again, talking from a performance environment. We are very challenged on our KPIs around competition. development, selection. Like, we have very, very busy competition calendars. We have very high parent expectations, and we're always trying to manage that with our duty of care and development of our own pathways. So, we're living in quite a very busy, very demanding environment, but also delivering or trying to attend to the needs of things that are very vastly changing and moving very, very quickly.
Yeah, David Faulkner does some work for us, and he says we should forget about key performance indicators. We should be talking about key people indicators, keep people interested, keep people, motivated, because, and especially young children. That's been brilliant, Gemma. So maybe could you just signpost for directors of sport, where could they look next? Where could they find more about this, about your work or other work? So that if they're interested, they can speak to you or they can embed this in their programs.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. You can find me on LinkedIn. So I've got quite a big profile through there. So if anybody wants to come in and know more about kind of the developing child and the education that we can provide for sort of teachers, schools, and your environments to support where you want to go with this, that's a good point of contact there. There were some free resources that were created through Podium Analytics, which was the organisation that supported some of the research that I developed through here. So again, they have opportunities for you to have some of those resources for there. And again, ultimately through the University of Bath, there's quite a lot of information that we deliver and provide, again, out to schools, or that is available online that staff can access and use.
That's been brilliant, Gemma. And thanks for all your work. And as I said to you, thanks for your work, going back, because I know a lot of teachers have really benefited from, your research and your help. So thank you very much for that. And thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation.